Is Don Morrison, and I'm the chair of the board at the North Dakota Kennedy Center, and I would like to welcome everyone here this evening. The North Dakota Kennedy Center is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to engage people and informational programs in our democracy. And I have to say, looks really good tonight. So again, I want to welcome everyone here. There are the restrooms are right around the corner out that door, and we appreciate our speakers here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to board member and director of the North Dakota Interfaith Alliance, Ross Keys.
Hello, thanks. Great crowd tonight. Again, I'm Ross Keys, and we're kind of doing a dual hosting. I'm on the board, as Don said, of the North Dakota Kennedy Center, but also director of something called the Interfaith Alliance of North Dakota. If you're interested in that, visit with me afterwards. I'd love to fill you in. Tonight we are having a conversation on fascism, or things that kind of resemble the road to fascism. But before we start, I thought I'd get a couple of introductions out of the way. We've got so that we can flow a little bit easier, we've got a couple of folks up here. You all know Dina Butcher, of course, over on the left. Dina's spent a lifetime of activism, active in policy and politics in North Dakota. You were an ag advisor, was it, to Governor Schaefer?
Yes.
Governor Schaefer, and you ran for the ag commissioner position in North Dakota. But she also has a family story. Her family lived in Germany back in the 1930s, and she's given this presentation before about the changes that they saw through those years. And I've seen it, and it was fantastic. And then she followed that up actually with, you did that at BSC once, and you did it down at the library.
And at the UU Church too.
UU Church as well, okay. But she also did an op-ed on this that appeared last fall that was picked up by a couple papers in the state, including the High Plains Reader, and it absolutely spread like wildfire on High Plains Reader. It was the hottest thing around on social media in North Dakota, I think. We also have someone who may be new to you, Sabrina Halverson. She's the new CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. You'll see a Michael Standard byline every now and then on a very in-depth piece of work in North Dakota. The issue may be childcare, maybe Christian nationalism, but some very, very in-depth, deep reporting that really gives you good background on these issues. She was in the media for many, many years in the North Dakota area doing ag media for about 8 years or so before you came here. And she gave a presentation like what she's doing tonight on a badass grandma's Zoom that I happened to catch. Dina was on there, and it was fantastic about the freedoms and rights that are being challenged today in America. And I thought it'd be great to provide a side-by-side discussion with the two of them and what they've either experienced or their families experienced or what they're seeing today. But first, before we get to Dina and Sabrina, I want to introduce you to a couple of other folks, a couple of friends of mine. The woman here in this black and white photo with the checkered jacket, that's Jenny. This was taken outside of her apartment in Amsterdam in about 1942. Her sister is the one way back, the tall one way in the back right. And we visit Jenny every now and then. She lives at a place called the Sequoias in San Francisco. One of the most amazing places you will ever be just because of the group of people who live there. Anyway, we often have, when Linda and I go there, where is she? She's way back in the corner. When Linda and I go there, we kind of bring the party with us. And these folks are, for the most part, they're 95, 96, and they do not miss when we come to the Sequoias for a party. So one party, Jenny was there, and she was talking about her days in Germany and Amsterdam, Jewish family, and her parents decided they were going to escape. And so Jenny and her family, by bike, car, train, boat, went through maybe 4 or 5 countries in Europe to get out of Nazi rule in the mid-40s, eventually made their way down to the Caribbean, and then it took them a couple more years to get to New York City. So she's telling us about this story as we're drinking wine and having some cheese and crackers from Trader Joe's in San Francisco. And she goes, oh, wait, hang on, I've got something I want to show you. So she gets her walker and she goes up to her apartment, and about 25 minutes later, she comes back down with this little box. And she sets it aside, and all of our friends are there from the Sequoias. So there's 10, 15 people hanging around and they're curious what she brought down. And there's Jenny now. All these years she had saved that star. And no one at the Sequoias had seen it. I don't know why it popped into her head, but she went up there and brought it down. So that's Jenny. Just a sweetheart. This is June Meyer. That's her war name up there, so I'll get to that. June lives there as well, at the Sequoias. Let me see, make sure I'm on this right page here. She didn't escape Europe, didn't go to the camps, fortunately. Single child, her family decided to hide her in a Catholic convent. So she was one of the hidden children. And the convent, she would move from convent to convent. She would talk to us about the head nun that she never liked, until years later she realized that the head nun was a major player in the underground and had saved her life and the lives of many other children many, many times, including one time standing up pretty much face to face to Nazi soldiers who wanted to search the convent. And here is, and by the way, so the last time we were there, it was a birthday party, and so wine and champagne and birthday cake. And June, here's what she looks like now. We're 2.5 hours into this party, and the place is shutting down, and they're getting ticked at us, but they don't dare kick someone like June and Jenny and a guy named Jack Dairiki who survived Hiroshima. They're all at this party with us. But eventually, we get up and we walk out, and June says, well, now what? So if June Meyer says, well, now what? You're going to do what she wants to do. So we grab another bottle of wine, we go over to another little lounge, and for the next 2 hours, till well past 9, and she just turned 96, so well past 9, she's telling us stories of moving from convent to convent and what it was like back in Europe under Nazi rule. So why did I bring these folks up, besides they're really, really cool people? Probably in about 2017, shortly after Linda and I met them, we were talking politics. They love to talk politics. And so I asked them, what do you think of what's happening? This was the first Trump presidency. So they were seeing things that were bothering them, and I wish I could say this in June's voice, but both of them responded to me in almost the exact same way. They said, my God, what are you people doing in this country? We've seen this before. That's an exact quote from both of them. We've seen this before. So that stayed in my head, and then when this opportunity to have Dina and Sabrina talk, I thought, well, here's a great chance, because we tell them that we try and keep their stories alive. Our daughter teaches high school, and she talks about her friends, Jack Dairiki and June and Jenny and a variety of others down at Sequoias. So that's why we're here tonight. One more quick slide. And Sabrina's got another slide on this, so I'm just going to go through this real quickly. What is fascism? Authoritarian, extreme nationalism, racist, xenophobic, patriarchal and chauvinistic, violent. Those are some of the more common characteristics. There's a lot of debate as to what fascism is and what it isn't, especially right now. But those are some of the characteristics that you'll normally see in just about any definition. So what we decided to do, we're tag teaming on this, and we haven't done this before. What we decided to do is, I'll go through some of these dates that are important in the life of Dina's family. Then Dina will take over with her description of what her family experienced, and then we'll go to Sabrina for, here's what we're seeing today. At the very end, we'll go through some things on how to be engaged, how to be effective. And with this crowd, it's you all know all of this, but we'll go through it anyway because it still helps us to focus. And then Q&A at the end. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go through this quick, and if you want me to stop anywhere, just let me know. But 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor, third of the seats in the Reichstag. February, and then things go fast. The Reichstag was destroyed by fire. Reichstag fire decree, suspension of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right to assemble. And this last one, government can arrest any political opponents without charge. Well, we're talking due process in this country right now. Dissolve political organizations and censor newspapers. Enabling Act, he could propose and sign legislation into law without consulting the Parliament. April 1933, civil service law, education law. Now you're starting to see some more of the impacts to the Jewish population. Bottom one's interesting too. German schools taught Nazi racial ideas about superiority of Aryans and the inferiority of Jews. Sterilization law, press censorship law, withdrawal from the League of Nations. Jews couldn't work in journalism, couldn't publish anything critical of the Reich, or you could end up in a concentration camp. That's what is crossing the minds of people in the media these days. Laws against dangerous habitual criminals, Jehovah's Witness organization banned, expansion of existing law that already outlawed male homosexuality, Nuremberg race laws. 1935, we skipped ahead a little bit here. Define German and Jew, Jews lost citizenship, banned marriage. And here we go. 1938, Jewish name law, require new passports, and what Dina's comments are gonna all lead up to is the night of Kristallnacht, November 9th through 10th, 1938. And then immediately, anti-Jewish economy law prohibiting Jews from owning businesses or engaging in trade, requiring new passports or identity cards listing the new names. So that's the background that we have. And then Dina, I'll sit down and I'll pull up your family photos.
Okay,
And in the meantime, I'm just gonna turn this over to you at this point.
great. Well, I'm ticked off that I have to be here tonight because I started telling this story because I got worried at the last Republican convention I went to in 2014. I even asked to be put on the resolutions committee because I had just finished pushing back on or I guess we were still in the process on the pushing back on the heartbeat bill, which had been proposed to be put into the North Dakota Constitution. And in that, it wasn't something that I felt had to become such a political issue as it has become in defining so much of what the Republican Party has become. But at that convention, I saw the normies splitting from those people who were just extremely right-wing, and it worried me. And that's one of the reasons that I became outspoken on this issue, because I had really not talked about my family background, because it was history, and it was painful history in my family. My father could not talk about it because he would always spiral into dark places. My mother was extremely protective of him, and also was, I think both of them suffered from post-traumatic stress from what they went through. But that's why I'm ticked off that I'm here, because I told you so. That wasn't the only talk I gave, and those weren't the only letters, the letter to the editor before the election, and other letters to the editor, and many posts on Facebook, and the kinds of things that I would try and broach with friends to say, this isn't just books that you read in book club. That was another thing that started happening. Every year my book club had to read a book about the Holocaust or the Second World War issues. And I kind of got tired of having them read them, because you can read them, but if you don't internalize the message, this is what you get. And that's what we're going to be talking about more. But the book that I thought was very good on the early 30s as a novel was The Garden of the Beasts by Eric Larson. And that really described well what happened in Berlin when the Nazis when Hitler was really getting, going through the things that Ross just went through. And my mother, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, my mother took my oldest brother, who was born in 1933, to one of the health spas that were popular in Germany, and I'm sure they're going to become popular here too, because that's what Kennedy, who is in charge of everything, says you have to do things a different way. And those spas were supposed to be good for your liver, some of them would be better for whatever it was, but there was a spa that was supposed to be good for my ailing brother when he was just a child. They went through Nuremberg on their way back and had a layover before the train left. She was there in the square where they were having one of those huge rallies, and it really scared her. She came back with somewhat of a resolve, and this is 1930. Fortunately, by the way, they got married. My mother and father got married in 1932. So, because there was that law in 1935 that said you couldn't just marry him, you couldn't have sex with a Jew. Now, I have three siblings, or had three siblings, so you know they did it at least 3 times. You can't outlaw everything. But it wasn't that she started pushing to leave. My mother had never, that was one of the first trips she had taken from this little village in northern Germany where they both had grown up and their families had lived for centuries. My father's family had lived in Schutt by Marienhofe. You have to have descriptive where you're near because they're that small. It's sort of like saying Bismarck by Jamestown in North Dakota. And theirs was Schutt by Marienhofe in Kreis, which would be the county of Norden, and they're on and on. But she was a real farm girl who had never been anywhere, and she was educated to the 8th grade. And she also had to bring up her siblings because her father passed away in the First World War, and her stepfather passed away, her stepfather passed away in the First World War, and her mother passed away when she was 20. So she was raising her siblings, and they didn't get married till 32, and my brother was born oldest brother was born in 33, my sister was born in 35, and my brother was born in 37. So, but during that time, my father, who had never been a practicing Jew, he was kind of a Jewish bad boy. His family, his mother and his sisters were all religious Jews and abided by but he apparently got into a fight with the rabbi and never made it through Hebrew school or any of the kinds of things. So he felt he was a German. He didn't have this, and I just read through again some of the things we were able to get him to talk about. And he said that, as Hitler was coming on and people were joining the Nazi party because it was politics. It wasn't about anything but politics as far as he could see it, and rehabbing the economy. because Germany, of course, was still recovering from the First World War and the depression that hit here, as it did everywhere else. So he wasn't bothered at first. In 33, 34, he's a farmer. He was raising beets and dairy cattle and living in this small community, figuring it was going to be politics as usual, until it wasn't. And things started becoming a little more militant. His mother, who lived with them in this village, was a very altruistic woman in her 60s. And she would go around to neighbors when they were ill and help them. And kids started being really uncivil to her. I mean, they'd spit at her. They did really unkind things to this elderly woman, and it became kind of intolerable. But going ahead, after the point of Kristallnacht, which was November 9th and 10th, because it was the shops and churches, synagogues were burned on the night of the 9th, but the roundup of male Jews, they did not round up families. They rounded up male Jews, and my father was in the field, and I did check his notes again, and it was at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 10th of November that people he knew pulled up in his field and took him off to that nearby town called Norden, to a slaughterhouse where they were gathering the Jews, or they pulled some of them in the night before, and then they gathered them and took them to Oldenburg, where they were put on a train. They went by bus to Oldenburg and then were put on a train to Berlin, to what was Sachsen. It's sometimes called Oranienburg and sometimes Sachsenhausen, and it's easier for me to pronounce Sachsenhausen, so it's Sachsenhausen in most of my notes. But he spent, this was, again, it wasn't that he was oblivious, it was just that he was going about living life and taking care of his family and trying to make his way through these horrible things that were going on, beginning to happen. But this was the real wake-up call. And my mother had started writing letters to people who they knew from their village, some in Canada. One who was the person who did sponsor them lived in Gordon, Nebraska. He was a baker's son in this small village and had gone to elementary school with all of them, but he had left there and was a successful baker and ultimately a successful rancher in Gordon, Nebraska. And after many appeals, as things, once my dad had been picked up, it got a little drastic and concerned. So he finally did agree to sponsor my father. And this was, there is a name, if somebody can think of it, for those who were allowed to come because somebody was kind enough to sponsor. And I think that's what's happened with the Ukrainians, who are worried right now on being deported. But he was lucky. I mean, my family was so lucky to get over here because there were only 200,000 Jews allowed in, and that, you can imagine how many were turned away. And that ship that got turned away at the port, it's just a terrible story. But my mother was doing that and they got their exit papers. They were turned back at the Dutch border, and the reason they were going to Holland was that my uncle, my father's brother-in-law, owned a farm near Leiden in Holland. And so they were going to stay with them until their ship, which was a freighter that left on what would that have been, about the 10th of November, 1939. And if you historians know the timeline better than I do, there had been the Austrian Anschluss had already happened. Poland was being invaded, and they got to the border, turned back once, but then they got across into Holland, boarded a freighter out of Rotterdam on November 10th, and arrived in New York on November 24th, just before, or the day after Thanksgiving. It would have been 24th or 25th. And the ship, which is the Burgerdiek, it was a Dutch freighter, the planes flew over them as they were going through the channel on their way out, and fortunately they were flying the right flag. And then when the ship came back across, it was sunk by a torpedo. So they were very fortunate. They made it there. There were some relatives who housed them for a short time before my dad got on a train and went out to, or a bus. He took a bus out to Nebraska to see what conditions were out there, and then my mother and 3 siblings got on a train and went to Gordon. Now, while this was all playing out, I mean, this is 1939, November, December. Okay, I don't want to interject sex too often, but somewhere along the line, I was conceived. And I was always referred to as the little Americana. Whenever my father would introduce me in other years, I was the Amerikaner. And you know, that's sort of like what's happening with some of the people who come to this country. I was probably an anchor baby or the equivalent thereof. But they stayed in Nebraska, and of course there was no communication with their families. And on the one hand, my father had no idea where his family. He knew they were in Holland, but no communications. My mother's brothers, she had 2 brothers who served in the German army. Both of them, well, the one was captured in Norway and spent his prisoner time in England working on farms, because he had been a farmer, and so he was lent out to farmers to help them with their crops in England. The other one, in the end, ended up being just by his fingertips, being able to get on a truck and get out of the way of the Russians. And had he been just a little bit, had he not been able to get on that truck, he would have been a Russian prisoner of war, and that was really hell. And a lot of those people never came back. But that's a kind of a tough one, because there were trains going by Gordon, Nebraska with prisoners of war on them. And my mother never knew if her brothers or family members were on those trains, and my father didn't know what was going on with his family. So in 1944, we moved to Belmead, New Jersey, which is near Princeton, New Jersey, to rent a dairy farm, because my father was not able to get a foothold in raising cattle so that he could sell them and get a foothold. And that's a whole other story. I'll write a book about that one. But this was in 1944, and I was 4. And my brother would have been 3 years older. So we used to race to the mailbox to see if there was anything there, because there'd been some trickling in from my mother's side of the family. And then there's a day that the letter came with the black stuff around it. What do we know? But we took it to my dad, and it was horrible. Because, now let's show the pictures, because I'll introduce you. So many of these things, I think when you read the books or you watch the series, you don't connect with the people. And that's why I'm here, is to connect you to the real people. This is my father and his 3 sisters. The one died in 1918, which also brings us back to our contemporary COVID flu. She died of the Spanish flu in 1918. But the other 3, one of whom was married, were all murdered at Auschwitz. So if you want to go ahead with that. This is my mother and father and 3 siblings just before they left in the summer of 1939. And that's my grandmother and my 3 siblings. Now, to prove what Hitler used as his gauge for if you were a full Jew or a part Jew, was if you had 4 grandparents who were Jewish, you were full Jewish, and my father did. So he would not have gotten away, because some of my mother's family thought that my mother should stay with the 3 kids and they'd be okay, which wouldn't have been the case, because they changed the rules every once in a while. So this was his parents, my father's parents, Goldina, after whom I was named, but they dropped the gold. Otherwise you could call me Goldie. And those are his grandparents, but go ahead to the next slide. And this one is interesting because it shows where my grandmother had to sign over her property, because at that point in January of 39 was when, or 38 actually, January of 38 was when my father had to sell his property. I'm wrong on some of the dates here. But they could not own any property, so he had to more or less give his farm away. And this was her, I thought you'd be interested in seeing the eagle, the German Nazi insignia there. There was a stamp that all government used. Go ahead. And that's up close. And my father wanted his mother, and his niece and nephew to come with them. But the parents were so convinced that they wouldn't get into Holland, that Nazis would not invade Holland, and that the Dutch government would no way carry anything forward as did happen. But go ahead, I'll take it through the rest of it too, Ross. This is my cousins, Bernard and Dina, both died or murdered at Auschwitz. Let's go to the papers that show those. These are his sisters. Okay, these are not death certificates per se, but they do tell where they were born, or where they were born, and where they died, and it was Auschwitz. So I just superimposed their pictures on the papers that tell. Yeah. But that's the family. And when he got the notice, it was pretty dramatic. And I try to get through this without doing this, but whenever I think about that moment that he's got the letter, it just, the sadness, the grief, the reality that this had happened was just overwhelming. So, the reason I'm being so outspoken about this is, it took from 1933 to 1939. And that's scary. And there were just too many parallels happening when a guy who's nuts and a megalomaniac and proven to be an evil person can take over the government, make the laws, listen to people who want to create a pure race by getting rid of children who have illnesses or have disabilities, having to find, and this was one of the quotes that I found so compelling, is as a political ploy, using the Jews as the pivot point to get people to hate to the point that they would build and use the killing camps that you have all seen documentaries about. And Hitler said, if we hadn't had the Jews, I would have had to invent them. And it's, I mean, this is the only reason I'm still speaking out about it, because it's, I am scared.
Scary times.
Yes. That's my story.
Can you guys hear me okay?
No?
It should be on.
Yeah, that's not.
I have been losing my voice this week, and it decided today to really be gone, so I'm gonna do my best here. I'm normally a hugger. I just want to hug her, but I have germs, and so I'm keeping my space. We're gonna go in a little bit more in depth on some of the things that Ross spoke about. Start off just to tell you who I am. I am the CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. I've got more than 30 years in the news media. I have won a few awards, it says it up there. I most recently was the National Farm Broadcaster of the Year for 2024. This picture, I look a little goofy in it, but I really love this picture because I was one of 6 journalists from around the nation invited to the White House for a special press briefing on rural matters. Because most recently, as Ross mentioned, I worked on agriculture and rural issues. And I'm from Fargo. I live in Fargo. I'm originally from California. And I have reported on all kinds of issues over the last 30 years. I want to just take a quick second to point out that I am not a constitutional lawyer. If I was, I'd be making a lot more money. But my specific skill set is that and what I use as a journalist is I am able to take really complex situations and break them down into pieces that us layfolk that can understand better. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. So I want to tell you quickly about the more important part, which is the North Dakota News Cooperative. And the North Dakota News Cooperative was established in 2021. Our goal is to increase access to quality journalism around the state. We have a lot of good journalists in North Dakota, but we don't have a lot of resources, and especially for our rural newspapers and radio stations and things. And so what we do is we do in-depth stories about important issues in the state, and then let newspapers and other news agencies use those stories for free to them so that we can get these important issues out. We also have another part of our mission, which is media literacy, and that is to help regular people understand more about journalism and media so that we can have a more informed community. So I want to be very clear about this, that this presentation, my aspect of this is not it's not about Republicans versus Democrats. It's not red states versus blue states. This is really about something that's a lot bigger, and it's about understanding history so that we don't repeat it. It's about recognizing threats to democracy wherever they come from, not tied to one particular party or another or any political beliefs, but we're talking about protecting the U.S. Constitution and the rights that it guarantees to all of us. So most importantly, what we want to have is just an honest and respectful conversation about power, freedom, and our shared responsibilities as citizens. So going in a little bit more in depth into what Ross was saying, defining fascism. Fascism is an authoritarian political ideology that promotes a centralized government. So that means that power is tightly controlled at the top, often by a single leader or a small group of leaders. In these systems, dissent is not allowed. People who speak out or disagree are silenced. They're punished or even imprisoned. Fascist regimes also tend to push extreme nationalism and militarism. Excuse me. The government often promotes the idea that the state is more important than individual rights. In other words, your freedom comes second to loyalty to the government or the nation. They also reject democracy. There's no fair elections, there's no checks and balances, and no free press. The government controls the media, spreads propaganda, and often uses fear or violence to keep control. So I want to highlight one of those words in there, and that is centralized. In a centralized government, decision-making is not shared among states or cities or communities. Instead, nearly all the power is actually held by the central authority. So that would be one person controlling everything, us not having, the rights that we should have as states or counties or cities. So that central authority is an important aspect of having a broader fascist regime. Excuse me. In these systems, local governments and individual citizens have very little influence. The central government makes the major decisions, including political, legal, economic, often without considering input from the people. The dictator often controls the military, the press, and the law, and creates a system where there's no room for disagreement. This type of power structure is what gives fascist regimes the ability to maintain their tight control, because that control belongs to only a few people. Here are some examples. We've just heard the best example that we could possibly hear, a very personal description. But Mussolini is often credited with founding fascism. It's not something I would think you'd want to be known for, but he did create a one-party dictatorship that controlled the press, it suppressed political opposition, and used propaganda and violence to promote nationalism and loyalty to the state. Then Hitler's Nazi regime was a form of fascism that was extreme and emphasized extreme nationalism, racial purity, and authoritarian rule, as we've just heard. Spain also, after their civil war, they had a military dictator who suppressed political dissent, banned opposing parties, and promoted Spanish nationalism. Today, no governments actually officially call themselves fascist. There are some that we could probably sit here and debate if they are. But fascism, as it was practiced in the 20th century, is widely condemned. But that doesn't mean that the traits have disappeared. Some modern authoritarian regimes show what we call fascist-like traits, which are similar patterns of behavior and control that resemble the historical fascist governments. For example, we might see extreme nationalism, where a country is portrayed as superior to others and loyalty to the nation is demanded above all else. This goes beyond our patriotism, where your loyalty is demanded. Suppression of opposition. Critics, activists, journalists are silenced, are jailed, and pushed out of public life. Control of the media and public life, including the spread of propaganda, restricting press freedoms, and promoting only one narrative. Again, in this type of a government system, you have your person in control saying that only what they say is true, none of the other information matters or is fake. Militarized leadership, where the military plays a central role in government power, and strength and force are emphasized over diplomacy or debate. So while these traits don't always mean that a government is fascist, they are definitely red flags. And understanding them helps us to recognize when power is being abused, regardless of the country or the political party involved. So democracy versus fascism. While democracy encourages participation, transparency, and accountability, fascism concentrates on power, silences the opposition, and promotes control. Democracy and fascism represent two very different paths for how societies are governed. This side-by-side comparison shows how democracy empowers people, while fascism removes that power and places it entirely in the hands of the few. Understanding this contrast, I think, helps us to appreciate the importance of protecting democratic values. Democracy is not guaranteed. It must be actively protected through voting, civic engagement, and holding leaders accountable so that it doesn't erode into authoritarianism or worse. So let's look at democracy. Democracy is not just a system of government, it's a set of principles that ensure fairness, accountability, and equal representation. In recent years, we have seen some challenges to these foundations. So we're gonna spend a couple of slides here focusing on some key threats that could undermine American democracy. The erosion of democratic norms, and I think that there are many. In fact, for this slide and for the next few actually, I will say that from the time when I put this PowerPoint together a few weeks ago until today, more has gone on. And I was not able to keep it as updated as could happen. So you can probably in your mind even come up with more examples. But in recent months, we have observed significant challenges to foundational principles of our democracy, including the weakening of institutional checks and balances. The Trump administration has exhibited resistance to judicial authority. A notable instance that has been talked about a lot is the case of the Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Whether or not we agree or debate on whether he should be deported or should be here doesn't matter for this argument, because a unanimous Supreme Court ruling on April 10th directed the administration to facilitate his return, but the administration refused, so they are refusing a court order. Also, disregard for legal and ethical standards in governance. On April 16th, the same administration initiated a criminal referral against a New York Attorney General, Letitia James is her name, for alleged mortgage fraud. So they brought a case against her for mortgage fraud. This action followed her successful prosecution for $464 million in a civil fraud case against President Trump. She brought up that case, and then the administration went after her. So that is seen as a retaliatory use of federal power against a political adversary. And that raises concerns again about the ethical use of government authority. And unfortunately, that's not the only case that we could bring up, and it has been openly stated several times that there was intent to use, and not so much in this case, but in other cases, to use government agencies against political adversaries. Also, political leaders avoiding accountability. In another case, a U.S. federal judge found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in contempt for violating a court order that would have halted the deportation of Venezuelan migrants. The planes were ordered to be stopped by the judges, by the courts. Again, the administration refused to listen to the courts. These are serious situations, and they show some very serious problems that are going on. Attacks on the media. This one I take very personal. The reason that I'm in the media, the reason that I became a journalist 35 years ago, was because of the importance of freedom of the press. It is something that we have built our nation on, and it is important to democracy that we have people who can bring information to the public so that the public is well informed. A free press is essential to democracy, but attacks on the media have become more frequent. Journalists are often labeled as enemies of the people. Government lawsuits are targeting major outlets, and independent news organizations are being shut down. These actions undermine the press's role as a watchdog. In March of 2025, the Trump administration implemented a new media policy that restricted access for major global wire services, including the Associated Press, Reuters, and Bloomberg. These are three major wire services that have the resources to go and report at the White House and wherever the president is. And then, like what we do at the North Dakota News Cooperative, they then give their news out to other smaller organizations so that everybody can know what's going on. Well, so their access was restricted. This move significantly alters how journalists can interact with the president. It limits real-time coverage of presidential activities. Critics are arguing that this decision undermines public access to accurate, independent news, and also disproportionately affects organizations that rely on these wire services. Again, the smaller news organizations that are trying to keep you informed. There are many more examples. I'll just point out a couple more quickly here. The administration has taken steps that are seen as retaliatory against media several times, but another recent case is the AP being expelled from the press pool after refusing to use the term the Gulf of America. The AP is an international news organization. The reason that they were saying the Gulf of Mexico is because every other nation in the world calls it the Gulf of Mexico. So to avoid confusion, when they're reporting to those other nations, they are using the term the Gulf of Mexico. They had used in America the Gulf of America, but that wasn't good enough, and so there were retaliatory measures taken. Excuse me. Also shutting down the Voice of America, which is a US government-funded international broadcaster. The Voice of America delivers news about the US to other nations. And it's actually, Voice of America is a very good name for it because it is what brings the voice of what's happening in our nation to other nations. And that has been shut down. It did go to court. The court ordered that it be reinstated. Court case continues. Another thing that we're seeing is suppression of dissent and free speech. The First Amendment, which I am very fond of, the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech. Yet we are seeing growing suppression of dissent. Dissent just means disagreeing with the government. We are supposed to be able to disagree with our government. But activists and academics are being arrested or deported. Government critics are facing retaliation. Legal challenges highlight the risks to free expression. And all of that is fundamental to our democracy. We need that freedom of expression in order to preserve our democracy. Political polarization and violence. Political divisions are deepening, and this has been happening for many years. We can't say this is happening right now because of the Trump administration. This happened in the Obama administration, this happened before that, for many years, but it's getting worse, and we're seeing it get worse. We're seeing it become more out in the open, and we're seeing it become more accepted, especially by our national leaders. That is something to really keep an eye on. As political divisions deepen, it's becoming extremist groups and inflammatory rhetoric are continuing to contribute to instability in the nation. So a democracy cannot function when citizens view each other as enemies rather than fellow participants in governance. And I think that that's such an important thing to remember, because when we're fighting among ourselves over which is better, right or left, red or blue, we're not focusing on maintaining our nation and maintaining the things that were important in our democracy. That infighting has really caused some significant issues. This is one of them, public distrust in democracy. Trust in democratic institutions is declining. We're seeing in polls that have been taken around the nation, we're seeing more Americans say that they feel their government is ineffective or does not represent them. Misinformation, disinformation, frustration, and lower voter turnout are further eroding our faith in the system, which makes it easier for anti-democratic forces to take hold. This is one way that happens, which is technology. Technology is being used to spread falsehoods at an unprecedented scale. AI-generated misinformation, deepfakes, algorithm manipulation make it harder to distinguish fact from fiction. Addressing these challenges is essential to maintaining an informed electorate. I didn't put it in my notes because I hadn't decided if I was going to say this or not, but I'm just going to lay it out there. I have a very close family member who I love very much, and she noted, she was a faithful cable news watcher, and she goes very heavily to one side. And she decided that with cable news she was noticing that it was becoming more biased. And so she decided she was gonna stop watching cable news. And she told me she now gets all her news from YouTube. And I love this woman. I absolutely love this woman. But that is not a good idea. Because YouTube and our social media are designed so that when you watch one clip of something, it figures out, oh, you like that, I'm gonna feed you more of that.
Right.
So you're only getting a very one-sided view. So she is now, I mean, she's Southern, so I'm gonna say it, bless her heart, for trying to get more, balanced news, but unfortunately, she was led into this, this avalanche of things that are just feeding into her very one-sided views already. And that, again, is technology, and we can't say technology is to blame for everything, but I'm gonna say technology is to blame for a lot, so that is something to be very aware of. So in conclusion, I'm just going to say that, democracy is not guaranteed. It must be protected and nurtured. And we all have a role to play in supporting the free press, fair elections, and the rule of law. By staying informed, like you guys are, thank you for being here. By voting, by engaging in civic life like you do, we can help to safeguard democracy for future generations. As Ross mentioned, I first gave this presentation at the Badass Grandmas group. I am not yet a badass grandma. I hope to someday be one, and I hope that when I am, we still have a democracy here. But here are some things that you can do, again, to help support and fight for our democracy. Support a free press, stay informed, and vote. And again, I'll bring this back to what we do at the North Dakota News Cooperative, because, as I like to say, democracy relies on reliable information. I am pleased to be here, thank you, and I would be thrilled to answer any questions.
We've got just I'll just do a little bit more on ways to stay engaged and make sure how we're informed and using that information. It'll go quick though, because all of you are faces I recognize and you're already engaged and you've heard this before, and it's actually a presentation I realized today that I had put together for like some faith leaders who normally don't get engaged. So we'll just run through this quick, but I wanted to tell you first though, Jenny and her sister, and she thinks one other girl in that picture made it through the war. June lost about 20, Linda, about 27 very close relatives. So let's move up here. So just real quick, let's just run through this real quick. Helps folks focus is what I've heard when I've been doing this to faith communities. Stay engaged and stay informed. You're here, you're engaged, you're better informed because of these two already tonight. Do you have good sources of information? Make certain that you've got some trustworthy sources of information. I go to Heather Cox Richardson all the damn time. How many of you have heard of Center on Budget and Policy Priorities? I'm just seeing a couple. Okay, write that one down. I've been using it since the days I was working with Milo back in the Senate office. It's cbpp.org, cbpp.org. They will provide the best information when there's a budget proposal or a tax bill coming before the Senate or the Congress at the national level. They will drill down and tell you this is how it's going to affect low-income kids when they go to school. This is how it's going to affect Medicaid. This is how it's going to affect Medicare. CBPP is one of the best resources that I've used, especially back when I was working for Senator Conrad and Earl Pomeroy and Heidi Heitkamp. Talking Points memo, I've found Josh Marshall to be very insightful in his analyses. Then a couple of basic ones. You've all got your own. I bounce around Raw Story and Daily Kos every now and then. But do more than just be engaged and inform yourselves. Engage and inform others. Whether it's through your organizations, whether it's through your faith communities, at potlucks, bring some people that haven't been there before. Book clubs. I'm hearing more and more about book clubs. Kim, you mentioned it tonight, but I'm hearing from Jack Scaly's got a book club that he goes to with Sylvia Bowles Church, and they've been covering some great Christian nationalism books, and everyone's talking about it, and they're being more informed. Social media, if you're familiar with what that can do, what it can't do. Letters to the editor, not as popular as they used to be, because who reads, newspapers? But let me tell you a story about, yeah, I know, Steve, I know. I was just throwing that in there, but let me tell you a story about letters to the editor though, okay? And here's a pro right here in front of us. Back when I was bouncing around the state with Earl, you'd always want third-party validation. So we'd go to Valley City and we'd want a headline, or we'd want a column in the newspaper, something that said, Earl's going to bat for kids. Because then you'd see that in the TV ad, right? That was the third-party validation that we wanted. We could never use letters to the editor, of course, because that's someone like Milo spouting off, so we wouldn't use those in our ads. But when Dina's op-ed came out, all of the social media use of that op-ed gave it a third-party validation that we never could do with TV ads. Social media is creating its own third-party validation of these letters to the editor, so don't think they're worthless. If you've got something to say, we need to create an environment within which people can run for office, or maybe Dick Devers says, maybe I should support this bill. That's the environment we want to create. And when you combine some of these opportunities, it magnifies that voice. So people don't write as many letters to the editor, some exclusions in this room, but they can be used through social media to expand their reach. And Dina's was as good as I've ever seen on that. Hold community discussions around current topics. ERA Now in Grand Forks pulled together with several faith leaders and me. They showed God and Country. We had a panel discussion afterwards. About 120 people showed. The questions were incredible. Locally, UU, UCC, and Sylvia Bull have been doing bad faith postcards from Babylon, right, Don? With then group discussions on those things. So they're all pulling people in and informing folks on some key issues, and these being Christian nationalism. Monitor and respond. Don't let Charlie Kirk come to town without responding unless it's way under the radar. That's Turning Point USA. They're gonna bring some pretty awful things with them. Monitor and respond. Find organizations that share your values, local, statewide. North Dakota Human Rights Coalition, I'm on the board of that as well, and they are going to be starting some monthly meetings in Bismarck. Look for that information. They've been doing these in Minot, Grand Forks, Fargo. We held off here because of all the meetings going on with the legislative session. But they go to bat for a lot of good issues. AFL-CIO, League of Women Voters of North Dakota is fantastic. Yeah. They put out some really good stuff. ACLU of North Dakota on school vouchers, critical information. Prairie Action had a bill tracker system during the session that I used with my Interfaith Alliance all around the state in order to keep up on where these bills were. National. Find organizations nationally that you can tap into, because they often have some really good presentations. Like, have you heard of Red Wine and Blue?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Red Wine and Blue, good stuff. They just had Heather Cox Richardson and Representative Jasmine Crockett on a combo deal about a week ago. That was fantastic. Democracy Forward, and I'm gonna put a plug in here because they're getting more and more active. There's my national affiliate, the Interfaith Alliance, it's a national organization, has been very, very active. And in fact, I've got a copy of a letter that they put out here criticizing this anti-Christian bias task force that's been pulled together by the president. And so they're getting very, very involved, and they've got some great information on their website. So Interfaith Alliance nationally. Create partnerships, support each other, demonstrating allyship is critical. 2023 during the session was a tough time for our LGBTQ community. And I thought it was really, really important that we got a lot of faith leaders to sign a letter to the editor expressing how upset we were with the bills being promoted in the legislature. There are several people in this room who signed that letter to the editor that we sent, and it played around the state. Demonstrating that allyship is just really, really important, especially to some communities that might be on the bad end of the stick from the legislature at times. So demonstrate your allyship. Get to know your government, participate where your interests lie. Might be book bans. Check out a school board meeting. A lot of people don't even realize there's library boards. They've been fantastic on these book bans, by the way. A local library, especially, she's just been wonderful. Citing for Clean Energy, you can go downstairs here and talk to those guys. But the local level has been the focus in this, again, I wrote this for a faith leader presentation. Christian nationalism has been focusing at school boards and library boards for 30 years. Find a candidate you can support. This is a lengthy one, I'll get through it quickly. Let your elected officials know of your concerns. Get to know them if you get a chance. Might not be at the legislature, might be at a public event, might be at a city county meeting. And then there are ways to contact the offices. Postcard campaign, where a national office gets about 5,000 postcards and you sign your name and it all comes in and the delegation looks at it and sets it aside. Don't bother with those. If it's a local neighbor-to-neighbor postcard campaign, sure, those are effective. Phone calls. Have you ever been called by someone that says, hey, we're with so-and-so and we'd like to connect you with Julie Fedorchak's office so you can tell her that you don't like S24. Have you ever had any of those calls? I've taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And most of the time, the person that's being connected to me says, they called me and I don't know what I'm supposed to say. So don't bother. Don't bother with that one. Call them yourself. Call them yourself. You should have their phone numbers on your Outlook, by the way. Have their phone numbers on your Outlook. Emails, personal letters with stories can be effective. Maybe not for the member of Congress, but maybe for the staff person who reads it. But in-person visits is where you're gonna get your bang for the buck. Is Brian Polachek in the room? I didn't see him. Okay, Brian coordinated dropping off a letter recently and walked up into the federal building, had a press event out front, a bunch of people gathered. That's how you want to get some attention. If you can organize with a group, if you can go, hey, I want to be a part of the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition visit to Senator Hoven's office, you need some more bodies? Because as soon as they see that NDHRC is coming, they're thinking, okay, they're gonna take photos, they're gonna contact the media, and they might put it on social media themselves. They start studying the issue, and they make certain that they pay attention in the meeting. And if they don't, well, then you can say that they didn't. You can say it in a letter to the editor, you can say it in social media, you can hold a press conference if you want. So the meetings with organizations are very, very effective. And that's speaking from personal experience dealing with organizations that would come in and visit with us. Then of course, run for office. Katrina Christensen isn't here, so that first one doesn't count. Maybe get involved with a campaign or two to see what it's like. See if you're comfortable with it. Are you attending school board meetings? Start there. Tap your toe in. A lot of the Interfaith Alliance of North Dakota folks now who have never submitted testimony are now submitting testimony. Well, it's passed now, but they were submitting testimony left and right by the end of the session. And they had never done it before, but we make it real simple between League of Women Voters and what I provide. So get comfortable with something.
but take care of yourself. I've seen folks jump into a session, go 110 miles an hour, and I've not seen them since. This is emotional stuff. It can drain you. You can get angry. You can feel hurt. Take care of yourself. Take care of the person next to you. Because people are going to get hurt during these sessions. Show up. Share your talents. Bring someone new. And then with all of this information you have, you're going to run into that good person who's a neighbor or that good person who's an in-law, and a conversation about politics is going to come up. And all I want to do is make sure that you're informed, make sure that you're engaged. But a guy with the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy left me with this once at a presentation in Fargo. Don't go into that conversation with that in-law or that friend who you know is on the other side and you want to just chew into them. Be curious, not furious. Find the question that will get you to help them open up. Enough questions through curiosity is going to help you guys find, wait a second, maybe the person you're talking to is going to find that you've got a point. You know, maybe it's not a good thing to end Head Start, but you're not going to get there by chewing them out right away. So, yeah. And it's the hardest thing to do because you want to go in guns blazing. But if you've got someone that you really want to get to listen to, you curious, not furious. Keep that in the back of your head. And with that, questions for our excellent guests here.
Don loved that. I'm Greg Gallagher from Ed. Dina will always be a hero. When I see what happens with us as a whole, our best opportunities lie in how well we network together. In this room, everyone belongs to probably a dozen different networks. How we work together and expand it, and it's all we do. But my question along the lines is, from your perspective, how can we best build the collaborative of the larger organizations that are out there to be able to work in common and bring together the resources required to build the kind of visibility, the events, the money, to be able to really move it forward so that we in effect can use the press and feed the press with information in order to drive a narrative that is really going to speak to what we're about. Because if the press is anything, a lot of times it's both politically and constitutionally agnostic. It wants to be sort of on the side without a point of view. In order to really make this thing work, we gotta have a point of view. We all have it, but it's dispersed. How do you see bringing together the various groups to be able to have that kind of collaborative that can really, in effect, move mountains?
Sure.
I'll take that. So a few years ago, after Heidi lost, we created something called the North Dakota Voices Network. And my job was to pull as many progressive organizations together as possible. AFL-CIO, North Dakota Women's Network, High Plains Fair Housing, North Dakota United. I had probably 40 different organizations that had normally been used to working by themselves, DRC, right here in this building. And we were very, very successful in breaking down the barriers and sharing intel, sharing events, sharing bills that we needed support on. And we started seeing a lot of coordination that hadn't happened before. So that was taking place in 2021, 2023, 2025 session. Right now, Prairie Action North Dakota is continuing with that effort. So we have to break down those silos because a lot of those organizations just work. They don't know what NDHRC is doing, and you don't know unless you're intentional in reaching out. So you've got to be very intentional reaching out, which is what we did. That effort continues. The school vouchers, was it school vouchers? They got like 4,400 emails. And you know, a lot of those emails also came from faith leaders, because I've been trying to do the exact same thing, is building up those relationships, those partnerships that you need to actually break through. And it's early, but we've been seeing positive results. Does that help answer that?
It moves it a bit.
Yeah, no, it takes, there's no magic bullet. This takes a long time, and I continue to try and build the Interfaith Alliance by going out one-on-one to pull people in.
Great. I think if you're talking about finding people who will actually run for office that are not just an R behind their name, I think what we need to do is show the support for the individual. Because I think it's wonderful when women will take their time and run for office, men as well. But when we think we can get women to run for office, it's not just giving them money, it's giving them support. Because they've got children to take care of, they've got families to take care of, and you have to build in an awareness that giving money is not giving support. And giving support is getting out on the street and campaigning for them. So many times we nominate somebody, we send them out there and they're on their own. That's what the parties have done. And believe me, you get the nomination, you stand up on a stage with everybody, and then you're on your own. And I think Democrats and Republicans do it poorly. I guess that's the way you would say it. But there's so much more to it than just going to a march. I think these 2 marches that have been held, the 2 that I've been to, have been extremely successful. And who's doing that? I don't know if any of the representatives who are organizing those are here, but they should be commended. Because to get 1,500 people out on the curb in front of the Capitol, that's amazing in North Dakota. And that's happening all across the state. Just like Rachel Maddow has been showing it all across the country, it's happening in North Dakota. And eventually those Venn diagrams come together and you are building momentum. But the answer to say that you're gonna find some organization that brings everybody together, that's been going on for generations, religious-wise, political-wise, however you wanna take it. But I think we're seeing momentum and a shift. And what have they said? I think some politician said that it only takes 2% of the population to turn the tide. So I'm looking for the 2%.
Hi, Ross, my name's Chris Hogan, and you mentioned Christian nationalism a few times, and I was wondering if you could kind of clarify that movement, because I don't really know what's going on with it, and it sounds like you do.
So the question is, what is Christian nationalism? It's,
Ross, why don't you use that?
oh, the mic, I'm sorry.
It's on.
Okay, Christian nationalism is the belief that the United States is a Christian nation, should be run by Christians. To be a good American, you must be a Christian, a specific type of Christian, and that male Christian leaders can determine, and God's law overrules the Constitution, and male Christian leaders will determine what the laws are based on their interpretation of either the Constitution or God's law. And then it goes beyond that. There's something called the 7 Mountain Mandate, where these Christian nationalists want to take over 7 key pillars of society, and a lot of people who are active, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson believes in it, Paula White Kane believes in it. A lot of very influential people believe in the basics of Christian nationalism, but also that 7 Mountain Mandate, where they're designed to take over arts and entertainment, politics.
don't have a
But
lot of
your
time.
organization is, as I understand it, your coalition of people that you work for, they are trying to address that?
Yeah, we push back through the showing of these films and community conversations. The national organization has come out with a variety of media events and press releases, so yes, there is an active effort to push back against that.
I'd like to thank all of you, thank you, Russ.
Other questions? Yeah, Marie?
I'm wondering what kind of specific outreach is being made with regard to younger people. It's been wonderful with these rallies on Boulevard, the presentation about the previous forms of fascism in Germany and Italy and so on. I'm kind of worried that a lot of young people don't even know that that kind of stuff happened, and with the analogy to patterns occurring in our own country. But what specific outreach is being done with young adults?
Your daughter's doing.
Well, some teachers take this on
Can you
themselves.
summarize that response?
Yes.
The question? How are we reaching young adults? You know, a lot of them don't even know the connections that were being made here tonight. So how are we reaching this next generation? And I think if anyone had a clear answer to that, you know, we'd be getting paid a lot more. There are teachers who work quite hard at trying to do that. I know one of them. But I see some positive efforts, especially in LGBTQ efforts that are focused on kids in high school. Sometimes, in fact, one of the events was held in here that I attended. I believe it was a Trans Day Remembrance. But no, we've got to be much better. I mentioned Charlie Kirk. They're trying to get on every campus in the country just about and spread the Turning Point USA message. And so we're getting outspent, outmaneuvered, and we've got to find ways to combat that. Right now, we're making efforts in North Dakota through the various organizations that I've mentioned, but you know, we could use a lot more money for one thing.
Well, you know, I think there's a lot more going on very quietly, and I was impressed. I think I've been doing this now for the 4th year. There's a teacher in Williston, and you think of red North Dakota, I mean, that corner is pretty red. But she's been teaching a full semester course on the Holocaust. She has been to Europe, she's traveled to so many of these concentration camps, and I think her master's thesis was written on it. She has I think she has 20 students each year at least, and she's been doing it for 10 years. And I think there are quiet pockets like these that are probably going to come under pressure as school boards are put under more pressure to control rewriting the curriculum for history, the rewriting history. But I just had my invitation for this year come through today, and it just tickles me because I get the nicest notes, thank you notes from all of our students, and it's part of what they have to do to get their grade at the end of this. I don't delude myself that I'm that kind of rock star. But it's just heartwarming to know that there are pockets of this going on where Ross's daughter is teaching, where Carrie is teaching.
I would also add to that to support your libraries, because a lot of this is housed in libraries. And when we start talking about book bans, we start talking about limiting information, this is the information that's going to be limited. Because if you think about what's in these books, it will include a lot of these trigger words that are leading to bans. So be very, keep a close eye when the government wants to start limiting our access to information.
Nancy.
So I'm on the Bismarck Library Board of Directors, and while we were working against 2307, that was the real controversial controversial library censorship.
Call it like it is,
Bill is-
criminalization of library workers.
Very good, Susan. Anyway, so, you know, it got through both houses and, we knew that would probably happen, and so the opposition to this then started focusing on the governor early. And, you know, a really terrific letter that was signed by, the North Dakota, States Attorneys Association and the North Dakota Library Association, and then probably about 25 organizations, and then like 4 pages of librarians, individual librarians, was turned into him, but they also received more than 2,000 emails to their office in opposition to that bill. And that's the power of the voice of everyone in this room as an individual, and it made a big difference. He vetoed it, and he told our library director, Christine, she thanked him in person for vetoing it, and he told her that he had fun writing his veto message, but his staff made him tone it down twice. That was his that was his third version of it, but so the bill made him personally angry too, but he did say that, you know, having the support of all of those emails behind him when he writes that letter, that veto message, is really helpful. So never underestimate the power of your email contact or your phone call to whatever representative.
Far be it for me to ever, you know, compliment a Republican, but I gotta say that the governor's message, his veto message, was right on, heartfelt, and the support that he received was wonderful, but it came from him. It came from him, that he saw, that that business of, we don't know what the next great book's gonna be, but I want it to be in the library.
Right.
Yes.
So I guess I kind of have a question. The end game of all that we're trying to do with the groups, with the messaging, with the knowledge and everything, is it that we're trying to change the minds of the people that are already in power? Or is it that we hope to then elect new people that will replace them? Because I'm a pessimist right now. I feel horrible. I feel like these guys have their noses so far that nothing is gonna change their mind, because it's power and it's FaceTime and it's movie star, and nothing people say is gonna change their mind. So how do we do that? How do we make that happen? Do we just wait and try to elect somebody new, or?
I think, personally, I think having these conversations is that, again, we need reinforcements. I remember after the 2016 election, how awful we all felt that he had been elected, and suddenly there was a spurt of activity, and there's so many organizations that got going to work together that wasn't going to happen again. And I think we're devastated, but again, we're called to action and we're doing things. And that's, I think, what it takes, is that if you just acquiesce, they're getting what they want. And this whole strategy of shooting too much information at us, it is one that where you just say, it's too much, I can't do that. But I think you gotta keep reaching out to other people, first to reinforce what you need, because it's awful to sit in a room full of people who don't agree with you and try and talk to them. But be with people you know, so that you get the strength you need, because I'm moving, I'm leaving blue North Dakota, red North Dakota, and I'm going to blue Seattle, Washington in September. Cause I have a daughter who lives there, and this daughter has let me go. But it'll be nice to be in that kind of, but I'll keep my ties here. But it's important to be around people that reinforce you so that you can go out and do battle.
Thank you.
I would say that want to try and change minds now, on this issue. Maybe John Hogan would go for once, "Hey, I'm gonna stand up for something."
Yeah.
When you do that, we don't get a backbone.
It's really other parts of his body that he's not having.
So.
What that guy say?
But I'll say that,
Well, he's
but
invisible.
sometimes change can happen quickly, like some votes at legislative session over the past couple sessions. There are legislators we did not expect that would turn our favor, and they did, and it only happened because of people like you in this room reaching out, getting informed, reaching out. At the same time, you've gotta have a long-term goal. North Dakota didn't go down this rabbit hole overnight. It took a few decades for us to get here, and that's what I'm thinking with, in order to change hearts and minds, it's gonna take a while. So the Interfaith Alliance, while we weigh in on legislation now, we understand that it's gonna be a long-term process. But you don't give up on trying to change things now because people get hurt otherwise.
I'll add to that. First, I'm gonna stay politically neutral, being the journalist in the room. But I do wanna say first off, I feel for you, and I understand that feeling. I spend the first 2 hours of every day reading news, and it can be very depressing. And so I understand very, very clearly and personally what you feel. And I think the important thing is to know, while it looks like things aren't changing, and maybe it feels like you're doing these things, or you're part of these groups, or you're posting or whatever, and maybe it feels like you're not changing minds, people are hearing you. And whether it's John Hoven or Kevin Kramer, or even all the way up to the President of the United States, or if it's your local school board, people will hear you. It may take a while for that change to happen, but it's important that they keep hearing you, because it's that voice that they're gonna hear over and over again, and they're gonna know, this is a voter, if nothing else, this is a voter, here's another voter, these voters are all saying something. So just don't let that depression and that feeling of, that doom feeling that we kind of get sometimes, don't let that keep you from having your voice. Because that's the biggest way they take power from us, is to take away your voice. And so don't let them have it, just keep speaking.
So I work in conservation, so a lot of my partners and stuff that I work with are federal employees.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them have lost
Yep.
a lot.
Jobs and
And that's
everything, yeah.
every day, I hear a new person, and it just.
And it's heartbreaking.
But that's what they need to hear.
That
They
is,
need to
yes.
hear your story. So that's what you keep writing now. I don't care if it's the same story you give us. They listen to
Yeah.
I shouted at it was my past district chairman, when he said, well, I know this is wrong or whatever. He said, but what can I do? And I said, that's what my parents' neighbors said.
And that people aren't, a lot of people aren't thinking that it's really happening, like the deportation, the people, the Oklahoma people that got raided.
Yeah.
I had somebody tell me, well, that didn't happen.
Right.
Or if they're here illegally, they should be deported.
Right.
How do you fight that? How do you get your point across?
That's where Ross's presentation really spoke to me when he said, what was it, your last slide there?
Curious, not furious.
Curious, not furious. I already forgot what exactly it was, but I remembered the meaning of it because I have a little bit of a temper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's very easy for me sometimes to hit into furious right away, but being curious works a lot better. I had a recent discussion with another relative, not the same one I mentioned earlier, but this was an openly Facebook discussion that I eventually said, okay, I'm just hiding these comments because they don't need to be on my wall. Because I don't get into political comments I try to keep all of my political opinions to myself, but it was about the deporting immigrants. And I have found that exactly what you said, asking questions, why do you feel this way, gets them to talk more about their thoughts and their belief system or why, and sometimes you can bring it down to where they're misunderstanding a situation, or where you can get into that point of, okay, well, what if you think about it this way, and help them to see it a little bit differently. But it's really hard when you're having a conversation with somebody that is very close-minded on their opinion, and they've had this opinion for their entire life, and they don't want to change it, and they don't want to listen to you, they just want to argue with you. So sometimes it's easier to walk away and maintain your own sanity, and sometimes that's important too, because if they wear us out, nothing, it doesn't help. I don't even know if I answered your question. I went off on my tangent, I'm sorry.
No, but is there really any answer?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so overwhelming that.
And I think that these two situations are very connected too, because it is overwhelming, because there are so many different fronts that we're fighting on too. There are so many different issues that we're looking at this time. It's not one, we're not rallying against one issue, we're not looking at just one thing that's being threatened at the moment. There are so many different things, and it's been going on for so many different, in so many years and in different ways, that it's exhausting, and we don't know how to continue. But the only way we can is to keep going, and to keep speaking up when we can, to not be the neighbor that says, well, I don't see what's wrong with it, because we can see what's wrong with it. So it's important that we keep saying that, even when we feel like we're saying it to a wall, and that's disheartening. But
I was gonna mention one way to do it is to switch the narrative in your own head. And rather than focusing on everything that's going to hell, and there's a lot to focus on and it can overwhelm you. I was on a call today with a lady who designed the humanitarian parole program for Biden. And she's feeling like everybody in this room. And she was going on about how we're going to lose the Ukrainians. They've already tried to deport the other 4 countries. The court stopped it at the moment. And I said, I just want to switch the narrative a minute. The humanitarian parole program was created in 1952. It's been used 126 times since then by almost every president. Jerry Ford used it to bring the Vietnam people here. You know who he contacted to bring the Vietnam people here? Tim Mathern. Tim Mathern's the guy that introduced the Department of Legal Immigration in North Dakota. We have one now that we haven't had since 1933. And what did you do? You designed a program for 5 countries, and there's 800,000 people safe in America because of you. Stand up. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, that group asked me to be kind of quiet for a while because they're worried about these people being deported. But change the narrative. America is not bad people. We got a bad guy in the office. We need to get him out. But we're not bad people. American people will still sell you a car and honor the warranties. Some will. And have a little faith in each other. And it doesn't look like that now. But change the narrative and remember. And one really quick thing, my sister sent me a book, How Do You Overcome All These Bad Memories? Never miss an opportunity to pet a cat. We gotta elongate the good things. Talk about the good things. Yeah. And you overcome evil by doing good. We got a lot to do. We gotta stop the evil. But we got a lot of, and there's good people. If you look at the talent in this room. Oh, okay. We had this back earlier. There's enormous talent. And I believe this, and it was talked about at coffee one day here. We don't know the solution. That's a good spot to be at, because a dream is more powerful than a strategy. And go back to your dream of what you always wanted to be, the kind of person you always wanted to be, and many of you have become exactly the person you want to be. And I'm so glad to be with you. We're in good company. We'll win this thing.
Wow.
That's a great place.
I was gonna say, I've been going to the protests and talking to people that are there. And the amazing part to me is everyone I talked to was from Dickinson or Bowman or New England. They're from the western part of the state. And I said, you came all the way here? Yes, I brought a whole carload of ladies. We all came. You know, and I said, that is so cool. And I said, are you having any protests in Dickinson? No, nobody, it's such a red area. Nobody wants to do it because they're afraid. They're afraid to protest in that area because of a huge amount of Democrats or whatever. Anyway, but it renewed my heart when I each time I went and talked with people, and they were from way out there, and they came all the way to Bismarck to protest, and I thought, yes, they're there. There's people that are knowing that we have to do something. It's very quiet, but they're there. You know, it's not as bleak as we think. A lot of people that were, and then one lady said to me, she said, I was a Republican and I voted every time. She said, but hell no now. You know, and so, you know, it was interesting to hear her comments and so on. And well, anyway, but I just wanted to say that it was renewing for my spirit that these people were coming all that way to protest.
Thank you, Rebecca, that's great. So we've had a couple of great speakers and questions just now, and thank you very much for that. So it's probably a good time to wrap it up. But I wanted to say a couple things, 3 things actually. First of all, if you're new to the Kennedy Center and you haven't been here, please sign up. We've got a guest book in there. We need your information so we can send you notifications when we have amazing programs like we had tonight. So please, if you haven't signed up with us, do that. Second of all, follow us on Facebook. Some of you aren't Facebook people, but please go ahead and if you are on Facebook, give us a follow so you know what we're doing here at the Kennedy Center. And a third, Bill mentioned coffee. If you are free on Tuesday at 10 a.m., come and join us for coffee. The conversation is rich and fun, salty. Would you say salty? Yeah. But it's almost as our wonderful friend Brian Palachek always says, he says this is the islands of sanity. So if you are available, please come visit us. And then finally, I want to say thank you so much to our wonderful speakers. This has been absolutely wonderful. We appreciate you so much. This is what everyone needs to be hearing over and over again so that we can absolutely make a difference for our community and our state and our nation. Thank you very much.